We still have you on mute.
Hey.
All right, great. We hear you loud and clear.
Good morning.
All right, well, I think we're getting ready to start here. Just to let you know, we've got people from all over the world and many people from all over the US tuning in today. Lots of TPS members, lots of friends, familiar faces tuning in. And I think we are ready to get started here. I'm going to pull up my script like normal. All right, so welcome everyone to the Photo Society Presents Michael Christopher Brown. I'm Alex Snyder, the Communications Director for the Photo Society, and I thank you for joining us today. For those who are new to the series, each month we host this free virtual event that highlights the work of one of our members. The Photo Society is a group comprised of over 200 National Geographic photographers that was founded 10 years ago by Randy Olson. This speaking series was the brainchild of member Gerd Ludwig, and today is our 14th presentation. Our friends at Sony are to thank for help making this possible. They've been longtime friends and supporters of TPS, and we thank them. After today's talk, I'll be hosting a question and answer session. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A button. Please use that to ask your questions. I'll try to get through as many as I can. And after the Q&A, we'll be giving away a Sony camera. One of you will be lucky enough to take home the ZV-1, so please be sure to stick around until the end. Today, we're featuring Michael Christopher Brown. He was raised in the Skagit Valley, a farming community in Washington State. He became known for his documentation of the 2011 Libyan Civil War and the resulting monograph, Libyan Sugar. In 2018, Damiani published his book, Yo Soy Fidel, a week-long journey documenting the cortege of Fidel Castro. And this year, Twin Palms will publish A Free Country, his work on the Cuban electronic music scene. With over 500,000 Instagram followers, Michael Christopher Brown has exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts of Houston, the Musée de l'Homme, and others. He has been a photographer at National Geographic since 2005, is a former associate photographer at Magnum Photos, and was the main character in the Michael Mann directed HBO documentary series, Witness, Libya. He's also a writer, collector, jiu-jitsu practitioner, and a father. And he's here with us today. Welcome, Michael.
Hello. Right on, Alex. Thank you for that that introduction. Thanks everyone for joining us. Gerd, thank you for inviting me. Sony, thank you for sponsoring the event. So I have a lot of photos to show, so I'm just going to launch right into it. Let's see here. All right, here we go. All right, can everyone see this? Alex?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So the Skagit Valley, this is a farming community in the Northwest, Washington State. This is where I grew up. This is like a mile away from the house I grew up in. Photography has been very close to my heart since I was a kid, really. Since I was like 11 or 12, I remember going out with my father and photographing around the valley. My dad was always photographing everything as a kid. And so from him, I learned how to use a camera. We had a darkroom in the house, and this is on slide film. And this is my father on the right, mother on the left. My parents worked in healthcare. My dad would go to orphanages around the world, Romania, Haiti, Mexico, photograph these places and come back, and he would do slideshows for the family in our house. And it was often with no lights on or music or anything, just showing imagery. And he would also show images in front of the community. So he would have these community gatherings and slideshows, and had presentations afterward. So from a young age, I sort of saw the power of photography and how it could be used to connect humans from around the world. And I was also, well, growing up, I was also exposed to, well, we had exchange students every year at our house. So we had we had people from Africa, people from South America, people from Europe, and also I was surrounded by that every day by foreign culture, just simply from where I lived. So this is right in front of the house I grew up in. This is literally across the road from where our house was, and I would often walk out in the morning and see these migrant workers. These are the people who do all the work in the valley, and they just have this incredible work ethic. And actually, growing up in the valley, I worked in the fields quite a bit, in the spinach and the berries, and I drove a pea combine. I mean, of course, for me, it wasn't as necessary working as it was for many of these guys. So from them, I also learned a lot, as far as just how to work and how to keep at it and how to, because growing up in the valley, like especially at that time in the late 90s, it was a while ago, we didn't really have much photography online. So my source of education in photography was generally libraries, museums, and also just like magazines, and also meeting other photographers. And I would just sort of wander around the valley photographing whatever I could. So this is an annual flower festival in the valley, and I would just cruise around, um, photograph these people, process my film, try and learn from what I was doing. And yeah, and I guess it was like through high school and college, it was always a hobby. Photography was, I was more into snowboarding and the outdoors and mountain biking and all that. But photography was also really sort of a primary expression for me because I had a speech impediment, until I was in high school. So I would always avoid speaking. Um, and so it was a way to um, express my views of the world. And then when I was in university, I had a series of courses that really sort of plunged me further into my love for photography. And it was this art history class, and I had a mythology class that was hugely influential on me. Just seeing the impact of imagery over thousands of years, and how this impacted culture, and really drove culture, and could be used for storytelling. And so I applied for school at Ohio University. I hear there's actually some Ohio University students on the call this morning, which was really amazing, and had a scholarship. But before I started school, I went to Mexico for a little over a month, and I just hitchhiked around the country just with one camera and lens, shooting tri-X, black and white film. This was kind of the first time that I was out of country on my own, just photographing in a very free way, just walking and walking and walking, and just looking and wondering and being curious, and not giving myself any limitations beyond that. Um, and within a month or so, I was back in the U.S. and I was in Ohio, which for someone coming from the Northwest, just having some experience in the world, I guess Ohio was not. I was very excited about the school, but I was very uninspired by my surroundings in Athens, and so Ohio was very challenging for me to create images that I felt were strong. Um, so I worked on a few projects there. One of the projects was about night in Athens, so I just followed around people working at night. She was a cab driver named Bev. Um, this is all on slide film. This man I would always see walking around the town. He was a really nice guy. He was schizophrenic, so sort of hard to communicate with at times. And he would just walk everywhere and collect cigarettes from these urns from stores and restaurants. And we arrived at his house, and this is what I saw. And just walking and walking and walking, you stumble upon these sort of magical moments. And I also, while in Ohio, I also learned how to get closer, how to really just be around people and listen, and how what I was feeling would really have an influence on whoever I was photographing. Something that, of course, I still think about these days. No matter what I'm going to photograph, I try and make sure that however I'm feeling is how I would want the subject to feel in a way as far as their response. And so I try and be calm. And um, Travis was really who I learned that with, because he was really, generally had a lot of energy. He was a boxer. He was 19 years old. He came from a broken home, abusive. His parents had left. This is his grandmother. They were in a bar one night and it was really late and they were drunk and they were thrown out of the bar. I was also thrown out of the bar with them. The bartenders were grabbing us and Travis became very aggressive and he started grabbing them and it was this whole thing. But very quickly, I was sort of, as a photographer, I was sort of wrapped up in his life. So also within this project, I learned how to keep a safe space. I really had a lot of empathy for his situation. He didn't have a lot of positive influences in his life, but one of them was a guy named Sam Jones who ran a boxing gym in Gloucester, Ohio, which was right down the street from Athens. I don't know if it's still there. Actually, I'd be curious to hear if anyone on the call has gone there or knows if it's still open. But Sam would always have these boxers come from around the region, and he trained a lot of champions. He himself was a champion, and he was really sort of a source of inspiration for a lot of the kids growing up in this area. And he was also a source of information for me as well. I always sort of somewhat identified with the underdogs in some ways. Having having come into the world of photography from a small area without much help, you know. But I sort of, after Ohio, I was able to get an internship in the State Journal Register in Illinois in Springfield, which was also super challenging. I sort of learned how to photograph everything within a short amount of time and get it in by deadline. And then I had another internship at National Geographic magazine, which was really life-changing in many ways. And one of the first assignments I had was in Orlando, Florida. So this is in Orlando, shooting transparency film still. And I had this amazing editor who I was working with named Susan Welchman. Maybe she's even on the call. Who knows? If she is, hello, Susan. I'm sure many of you in the audience know Susan. She was at the magazine for many years, and she shared a lot of wisdom with me that I still use now. And one thing she would say is that that you may want to keep your eyes open while you're going somewhere or coming back from some place that you're planning on photographing, because often the best images happen on the way, or they happen on the way back, or they're happening behind you. They're happening when you may not want them to happen. You may shoot for 18 hours a day and be exhausted and be heading back into the hotel, and you're just ready for a shower and sleep, and all of a sudden something amazing is happening. So the importance of always staying open to new possibilities and trying new angles and walking around. One of the other first assignments I had with Nat Geo was working with the explorer Mike Fay, crossing the redwoods from the southern part of California, I guess, into the border with Oregon. And at the beginning of this job, I got a call from the photographer Nick Nichols, actually, who said that he had some advice for me. He was a friend of Mike's and also had worked with Mike quite a lot. He just said, look, what you want to do is keep your mouth shut, photograph the whole time, and maybe he'll respect you and speak with you, which he did after a few days. One of One of the other assignments I had was photographing in British Columbia, this area called the Musqueam Management Area that is about the size of Switzerland. And we crossed this area in a little over a month on horseback, pretty much all off trail. We were on a few animal trails. Sorry, my voice. So we occasionally followed moose trails. I had the mare, which was very challenging. This horse named Hazel, who I loved, but it was very hard to photograph with her because, of course, the mare always wanted the lead. So I ended up actually walking and running a lot of the trip, and so I could get out of the group. Saw the Northern Lights for the first time at a hunting outfit up there. One of the other adventure stories I worked on was with this adventurer named Andrew Skirka, who did a 6-month circumnavigation of Alaska via pack raft and skis and also hiking. This is in the northern part of Alaska, this area called the Brooks Range. And this is also in the Brooks Range in the summer, the Alatna River Valley, just this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous place, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. Yeah, if you ever have a chance to go to the Brooks Range in the summer, check it out. And after a handful of years of, working on a lot of assignments for various magazines, newspapers, living in New York, I was doing pretty well. I had a couple assistants, I was making quite a bit of money, and I got, after 4 or 5 years, I was looking at the work I had made and I was happy with it, but I was also thinking, this is not why I became a photographer. So I began to go on larger trips and live in other places around the world. So I would rent my apartment out and keep everything in storage. One of the first places I went to was Kabul, Afghanistan. And so I arrived there, and of course, with the American occupation, I was very interested in seeing what was happening with the locals. I wasn't, at that point in my career, I was not interested in covering war. I was very curious about it because I come from a military family that goes all the way back into the Revolutionary War. So I sort of, of course, I always had an interest in war and conflict, but in Afghanistan, I was very drawn to the local population and just observing them. And so, yeah, I spent a couple months going around. This is outside an ice cream shop. It's a street vendor. It's in the old city of Kabul. And in China, I began working in China in 2005. I went there to visit some high school friends who were teaching English there, and I was just blown away by the country and the energy and just the activity and the construction. And I moved there in 2009 after making a handful of trips there, and I lived there for a couple of years. And yeah, I would just go around on trains and buses and just photographing with film, mostly with a snapshot point shoot camera, just in my free time, and just meeting locals and getting into their lives, and using what Chinese I knew at the time. I've kind of forgotten most of it by now, but yeah, but it was really a chance for me to be free and not to be sort of constrained by any, assignments or having to shoot something in some way, or just going out there and photographing when I wanted to. And that's also something I still try and do now. Well, that I always do, really. If I'm working on my own projects, I don't feel any responsibility to shoot this or that. It's really has to come from my heart, in my genuine sort of authentic need. And yeah, and around this time, I was also really getting into the iPhone. This is in 2009, so this is, yeah, around 12 years ago, a little more. And the iPhone, of course, at that time was very new. The shutter was not instant, so there was a bit of a lag. So because of that, I used this app called Hipstamatic, which would allow you to shoot a photograph every 15 seconds or so, but um, sometimes it would crash. So I ended up actually losing a lot of images in the early days. So the ones I would get, I would feel very happy about. Um, Also around this time, not long after, was when the Arab Spring began. Um, and, after living in China for a few years, going around, seeing a lot of the country, I had sort of hit a wall as far as inspiration. And I was in my apartment in Beijing and I was watching the news on CNN and just really blown away by what was happening in the Middle East, especially in Cairo. And not long after, I was on a plane when it shifted over to Libya. These images are actually from Cairo, photographed a little later in the year. But yeah, the novelty of the iPhone was just really magic for me, and the fact that if you had enough light, everything was in focus, and that it was a new way to photograph. And I just felt very free. I still do actually. I still actually feel more comfortable photographing with a phone than I do anything else. It feels more natural for me. It's something that it's sort of of course a camera is a camera, but there is something about using a phone that is not sort of associated with the history of photography. When someone sees you photographing with a camera versus photographing with a phone, oftentimes they receive you in a whole other way, which I feel can be sort of less threatening. Um, we're still in Cairo here, but we're entering Libya. So the Libyan Revolution, which became the first Libyan civil war, and then it became something else, and now is what it is. But I sort of the first week I was shooting mostly with my camera, with my Canon, which I dropped at a rally, and it broke. And so I kept like shooting with my phone. I was actually more inspired by the phone, and it was really amazing seeing this this country essentially after the government left the city of Benghazi. The people were in charge, so they were running all aspects of government. And coming from China, where everything was very organized and under control, this was a bit of a shock, and it was really amazing to experience this. And that is really the primary reason I went, was not for photography. Of course, I wanted to photograph, but I really was interested in experiencing this what they were calling this the Arab Spring movement, and to see it for myself. Because I was reading and hearing so much in the news, but very quickly I learned that in war, it's you never really know unless you go, right? Because it's so much more complicated and complex than anything that you could see in the news or even read about in a book. And again, the fighters at this time were going to the front line with anything they had, machetes or handguns, and it was just it was all happening out there in the open in the desert. So very precarious. And I was sort of, at that time in my life, I was also really interested in really challenging myself and really pushing myself and trying to see how far I could go. And found myself one afternoon, I found myself on a front line after everyone had left except for like a handful of fighters. And I was jumping in these trucks as they were going up into this hillside. It was actually not far from here. They were going up into this hillside and evacuating fighters, and at the same time mortars were landing on the hill. So it was like this something out of a movie, right? But it was happening in real life, and I was just going back and forth shooting these guys coming out who were injured. And actually this guy was injured at the same time I was hit in the leg by an AK-47. He was hit in the chest by an anti-aircraft bullet. And so we're inside an ambulance going to a hospital. Just saw a lot this year. Experienced a lot in Libya that really had an effect on me. years later, especially, but hundreds of bodies. You know, there's this image here. So there was a lot of sort of, at this time, there was, you know, a lot of people from other countries coming in, and if you were in the East on the side of the revolutionaries, they saw you as somehow helping their cause. And um, you know, a lot of the guys I shared cars with had like fought the Americans in Afghanistan, and just everyone was coming together, and so they could further the cause. This is actually right after an ambush. We were ambushed like a number of times out there. Um, you never really knew who was on what side sometimes. This is at a field hospital. Some really hard scenes to process. You know, I will make a comment on this. When I was growing up, my father was a physician, and he would often shoot these Polaroids of his operations, so he could study them essentially. And these occasionally would be left around the house, not on purpose, I'm sure, but you know, kids are curious about everything. And I would look at these, and from a young age, I sort of like would see like an exposed neck, you know, or like part of a body that might be seen as being gruesome. But I sort of, you know, as a kid, I would like see this as natural. You know, this is how we look on the other side of our skin. So I don't want to say that when I saw these scenes, I was unaffected, but there was something about the scenes that, you know, as horrific as they were not as were not very disturbing, at least at the time. But surely they had an effect on me. This is a cemetery. You know, there was just a lot of times there was just hard to know who was who. There was a lot of suspicion in general in wars. And I was actually also like a part of that at some point, because I would often shoot with just a phone, and I would be out there, and you know, someone would ask me, well, what are you doing? Who are you? And I would say, well, I'm a photographer. And they'd say, really? So at some point I was actually carrying a notebook around, like, and I would say that I was a writer instead of a photographer, and so I wouldn't create a lot of suspicion. And that actually would get me access into places like this, into hospitals where photographers weren't allowed to go. I was able, you know, to walk inside and be there. I was injured a second time as well. This is in Misrata, which was under siege, and we were there for almost a week, and was there with some friends and colleagues, some other Libyans who were killed and injured in this mortar attack. And I, you know, had quite a bit of shrapnel in my body, and my arm and shoulder and my chest and my wrist, and also my leg. Most of it's out of my body. I still have a few pieces, but I lost like half the blood in my body, had a couple transfusions, left the country, which was hard for me to do because I was, of course, I'm not Libyan. For me, it was not, you know, again, coming from a household and coming from a family that really sort of showed me how we're all connected and we're all humans at the end of the day. This I really identified with what the Libyans were experiencing. So, and I eventually came back after a couple months of sort of rest and recovery, and I came back into the country when the revolutionaries entered Tripoli. We don't call them, of course, revolutionaries anymore, but at the time, that's what everybody called them. This is Muammar Gaddafi. He ruled Libya for 42 years. He was killed in Sirte. Um, was there on the day he was killed. I was like a mile away. This militia captured him from these pipes underground, and so the Mizratan militias brought him into Misrata and had him laid him on the floor of a meat locker for 3 days. You know, generally in Arab culture, you know, Muslim culture, you bury someone within a day, but you know, the tribes basically said this man is not Muslim, um, and they kept him there. And Libyans from all over the place came to see his body. They were even flying in from out of country. But I got to say, of course, like not being Libyan and not having the same understanding of Gaddafi as they had, this was very hard for me to see. And even now, when I saw the families bringing their kids to see Gaddafi on the ground in that state, that was something that I don't think I would ever do with my daughter. And again, I'm not making a judgment on them, but I think like this is learning more about intergenerational trauma here in the past few years of my life, and also like having a 3-year-old now. It's hard for me looking at that picture. This was at the Libyan CIA offices, essentially. Within a year, I was working in Congo and had an assignment to photograph the minerals coming out of the ground and how they were used in mobile electronics. And so, you know, I was using a phone for all of this as well. And I stayed beyond the assignment and I began living in Congo. And I was living in Goma in the east, which, you know, Congo is really an anomaly. For people who know, Congo is, you know, the eastern part of the Congo is unlike anywhere else in the world. You know, you have like 6 million, I think, people killed since the Congo Wars began in the 90s, more than any other war since World War II. And most of these atrocities are unreported. Rape, of course, is a weapon of war. This was a trial that was supported by the UN of these women who were in this place called Minoba, where there was like 1,000 women who were raped, and the rapists, the accused, were members of the Congolese army who are here sitting in the background. I think there was one of them who was actually convicted, and so these women were up there sharing their stories in front of the judges. This was a young girl. She was only 15, and she was raped by 3 militia members. Had a child, and she contracted HIV. Her mother knew, but she didn't know. I mean, the history of Congo, where do I begin? It's very, very complicated. The more time I've spent there, I mean, I've been traveling there for the past nearly 11 years. I'm going back again this weekend. I'll be there for 3 weeks. We do workshops. Do workshops every year. I work with this with a British company called Ishkar, and we do show a little bit of the you know, the kinds of images that I'm showing you here, but actually most of the trip we show the more beautiful aspects of the country, because it really is a place of contrast, you know, like anywhere else, but especially here, where you have this incredibly horrific violence, but you also have this amazing beauty. And you just meet some really, really amazing people. This woman was in a battle. This is on an army base, and she was in a battle and lost her arm. She walked for 17 kilometers, and so she could get medical attention. You know, you see this kid behind her who's laughing and making faces, and I sort of, you know, this image for me really captures again that sort of contrast that exists in this place where, you know, most of the people make maybe $1 a day, if that. This is at a rally for Kabila, former president of Congo. This image here, there's, hundreds of NGOs in Goma, the largest UN peacekeeping operation in the world. It's like $1 billion a year. And there's a lot of people there who are trying to help. But this is kind of the feeling that a lot of people have where, there's all this help and money coming in, but where is it going? And it feels like an endless sort of crisis. This is the volcano where we go on our trips. We camp at the top of this volcano, and there's this huge lava lake at the bottom. It's really beautiful, and you can see the whole surrounding area. This was an amazing experience that only lasted a couple hours. There used to be these airplanes at the Goma airport that were abandoned, and the military had used this area as a military installation, but they had left while the war was happening. So there was a security vacuum, and the kids came in, and we saw it, and we followed these kids around these planes. And when I look at these images, I think, wow, like, what does an airplane represent? Well, it represents privilege and power and opportunity. You're able to leave one place and go to another place. And, these kids, of course, were not able to do that. They didn't have the means or the money, or, some of them were street kids. Actually, I saw some of these kids were selling parts from the plane on the street within a couple days. But for that window, they were in control, and they were sitting in the cockpit. And spent quite a bit of time with the indigenous as well, the Mbuti and the Batswa in the north. And this is in the Ituri rainforest. This is a net hunter hunting with his family. These guys were hunting for monkeys. So I'll be seeing them hopefully here in a couple weeks back in Ituri. Really incredible experience with them, just going around in the forest and hearing them use the sounds of all the animals, and so they can communicate with each other. This is back in Goma. This is at a psychiatric hospital. This is a young patient and his father. Mental health in Congo is like heavily stigmatized. This is in Virunga National Park. This man, his name is Andre Bauma, and he sort of watches over these orphan gorillas. And so I spent an afternoon with him. This is a young goat herd near Mount Mikeno, right inside Virunga as well. And this is at the border with Rwanda. So I also worked a lot around Central Africa. This is more like the Four Corners area: Uganda, Congo, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Working on a story about the Lord's Resistance Army and Joseph Kony for a couple of different magazines, but these are the Ugandans who are practicing. This man had been captured as a kid by the LRA and had escaped, and he had just arrived in this village. He was actually waiting for his brother. This woman was captured by the LRA and held for a number of years, and she became pregnant and eventually escaped with her son here. She was back in her hometown. This is in the Central African Republic. This is when there was a lot of fighting between the Seleka and Antabalaka, and so the Antabalaka / Christian community sort of made the airport their home, because that was kind of the only part of the city where you had good security. Liberia was working with Conservation International on some projects, and Sierra Leone. I mean, I'm sort of, I love Africa, really. I think at the end of the day, it's my favorite part of the planet. It's just a really, really powerful place. This is Luo Luo tribesmen in Kenya. Mm. This is in Kigoma, Tanzania. I was working on a story about Jane Goodall, who she well, there's a lot that we could say about Jane Goodall. She's amazing. I spent 1 week with her there at her home. She has a little house there in Gombe Stream National Park that she would, I don't know about now, but at that time she would visit it once a year or so. And that was really magical. Um, these these are young men learning how to fish in a village called Kazinga, which is right near Gombe, right near where I spent time with Jane. Um, I began working in Cuba in late 2014, when Obama announced new relations, and I had an assignment there in the old town, and I stayed on after. I met a group of youth who were like these electronic music DJs, and they would stay up all night and sleep during the day, and they were from a socioeconomic class where they couldn't leave. Of course, if you're Cuban and you have the money and the means, you can usually find your way out of the country, but they couldn't get appointments at the embassies, and they couldn't get visas, and so they were sort of trapped. So one of the ways they would escape, besides music, was through this drug called L-Dopa, which is a Parkinson's drug, and this was coincidentally the same drug that Fidel Castro used at some point for his Parkinson's. So they were both sort of using the drug, and so they could stay alive in a sense. But yeah, this was maybe the first time in my career that I was really like allowed inside a group of youth where I could really just observe. And I speak a little Spanish, but the Cuban Spanish is just was really hard for me to follow along with most of the time. And so a lot of times I would just like hang out with them and just observe and not speak and just spend hours and hours with them. This is underground in an apartment. When I see this image, I think of this, this blue wall, and I think of like them sleeping under the ocean. This is Helen. This is at a $1 pizza shop. And this is a foreigner. This woman on the right, she's Italian. I had this on my Instagram feed a year ago or something, and she messaged me out of the blue and said, "Hey, what's up?" Like, yeah, this is on the Malecon, which is in Havana, right near the ocean. This is El Moro. It's an old Spanish fort. This is Helen again. She wanted some photographs of herself out there, and so yeah, that work will be made into a book that comes out later this year. While I was there, Fidel Castro died, so the country shut down for 9 days essentially, and they had these rallies, and then they transported his remains from Havana into Santiago. So the morning they were leaving, there were thousands of Cubans lined up on the road like this, many of whom had slept overnight so they could see the convoy leave. And most Cubans worked for the government, so the government had like sort of made it mandatory that they come out along the road and greet Fidel as he passed. And so, the highway going across the country is like 1,000 kilometers long, and people would come out of their houses, and the government would bring them in on trucks and vehicles, and so they could line them up themselves. I had a press pass, but no one was given access onto the road. But after spending a couple of years in Cuba, I knew that even though it was sort of illegal, I guess at the time, I knew that the Cubans ultimately would want this record, and that the worst case is I would be kicked off the road. And we found as we got further from Havana that the policemen became more receptive with the Havana press passes we had. So the driver and I really had great access along this road, and so we usually drove a little bit in front of the convoy or a little behind, but not super close. But we found the Cubans were out there every day, and many of them would sit around the entire day waiting for the convoy. Didn't really receive much information from the government about when the convoy was coming through, other than the fact that it would be coming through at some point that day. It was really a special moment in their history. It was like this sort of, I'd spent a couple of years in the country trying to maybe say something about Cuba with my images, and I found that I sort of got this portrait of Cuba within a week. I have so many scenes like this where it's like this Where's Waldo collection. These are construction workers, school children, so most of the time it was only our vehicle on the road besides the convoy, but there was a village that we passed one afternoon, and a friend of mine, Ross, had seen us go by in his car, in our car, and he had a taxi, and they came up near us half hour later or something, and he stopped us and he said, how did you get on the road? How are you doing this? I just said, no, we're just going. You can join us if you want. So they did join us, and in the nighttime, fortunately he had, because of the nighttime, the convoy was arriving late in the Camagüey, and there were still many Cubans like this lined up on the road, but most areas had no lights. Here there's a street light, but most areas there were no lights. So fortunately Ross was in the car behind me, shining, the car was shining light on the people, and so I could actually photograph these scenes, because otherwise I would have gone by all these people without getting any photographs. This is actually, I used Sony cameras for these Cuba projects, and really the main reason why is because the A7S would allow me to shoot in really low light and still have really high quality imagery. So then I sort of around 2017, 2018, I had PTSD. I was dealing with a lot of stuff that actually, it was like a few years coming out of that, really. But in mid 2018, I went to Jerusalem in the West Bank, and made about 7 trips there over the following year and a half or so before COVID hit. And I was shooting with the iPhone again, and just going and photographing vertical format, mainly because I was using these images on my Instagram feed and my stories. And so of course, shooting vertically, they occupied more space on the phone, but also there was something more dynamic about the vertical imagery that I connected with. And of course, I'm sure most everybody on this call sort of understands what's happening in this area. So I was really just, driving between the West Bank and Jerusalem. I never had access into Gaza. You need a press pass or like a press agency or an assignment, and so you can go into Gaza. But I did as much as I could in the West Bank and Jerusalem and other parts of Israel. Of course, in a lot of areas where you go, there's military forces, and kids kind of grew up around this. This is not a real gun, but this is in refugee camp in Nablus, a Palestinian refugee camp. For those who don't know, there's a number of these refugee camps around the country. These are like essentially Palestinians who come from other parts of the land who are placed in these camps. Um, and this is in Hebron, but this is middle of the city. So these are Israelis, and you can see this kid has a little gun as well, like a little toy gun. Um, and this is in a kibbutz, which is in the West Bank, but this is a scope where you can look at these Palestinian villages. Um, this is outside a hospital. They're waiting for a fighter who they were calling a martyr, someone who was fighting with the IDF. And the Western Wall. This is a young girl and her family. This is a protest. These Orthodox were protesting against the draft, and so they blocked all the trains in Jerusalem. Ramallah. It's a mosque in the background, minaret. This is in Jenin. This boy had gone missing. They were, the population was accusing the IDF of storming his house in the middle of the night and placing him in prison. This is in Hebron. This is in the center of the city, near the Great Mosque. There's an area that's completely blocked off, and so the Palestinians can't go there. So these kids were coming by on their donkeys and just playing around as close as they could near the center. This is the road to Jericho. One of the roads, I should say. This is in Nablus. Just the history of this land is so complex and layered. These are the stones, the stone builders and cutters who build cities. And this is in Jerusalem again. This woman was a part of the Haredi Burqa sect. It's like the more sort of very conservative end of Judaism. When I loaded this image onto Instagram, some people thought that it was a young Jewish boy walking with a Muslim woman. It's at a home in Jerusalem. This is at a protest at the parliament. Yeah, and again, just going back and forth and trying to photograph every situation I could in hopes of sharing their humanity. This is in LA, so back home. So this is in early 2020, I guess, before COVID. I began working on Skid Row. Homelessness is a huge issue out here, especially at that time, but even now, I mean, there's a few homeless on our street, like in here at the bottom of the road. So it's kind of everywhere. So it became something that I was very, very curious about. And I met some workers on Skid Row and other parts of the city, and I would go around and just meet people and speak with them and do these interviews and try and understand more about the homeless situation in general. And yeah, much of the population is just very traumatized. I mean, how can you not be if you're homeless? And many of them are medicated, and not only medicated, but also on drugs. Drugs are everywhere on the streets, these homeless camps and on Skid Row. And the more I learned about that world, the harder it became to work there. And I'll end with just some more images from around LA. And these are, these days I'm like mostly a dad, and I do jobs when they come in, and working on making a company now with some friends. But I still, I get out and photograph here when I can. This is on July 4th. These are some images from home. So this is again, this was when my partner was pregnant, and this is in our friend's pool. Just the placenta, the magic of creation, the tree of life. My partner had a brain operation 1.5 years ago, and that has been very challenging for our family. I had my appendix removed, so with COVID and everything happening at home, it's been a challenging few years. But we have a beautiful daughter. She's 3, name's Poppy, and this is just right down the road from where we live. That's it.
Well, we thank you. It's some very, very powerful work, Michael. And as you can see in the chat box here, you're getting lots of applause from just about everyone, including your fellow colleagues at TPS. Thank you. And I will start off by saying Sam's Gym is still in Athens, just outside of Athens, Ohio, still going strong.
Oh,
and
wow.
It has been the inspiration of many OU students' photo stories. So it's always good to see work that includes him.
Wow.
But we have lots of questions. We're coming up to about the 1 o'clock hour. We're running a little short on time. So if you do have a question for Michael, please put it in the Q&A button, tap the button, type your question. I'll try to get to as many as I can. But I do have a couple lined up already. We have Zeno Marino, and he wants to know, as a strategy for approaching this highly competitive environment, would you recommend doing research on an environmental humanitarian issue and then just leaving and trying to document
it? Yeah, yes, in general. With everything I photograph, there's a certain amount of research that goes into it. When it's an assignment, there's usually some sort of idea of where the work should go and what kinds of imagery there should be. And so really depending on what that is, I will adjust my research and try and learn as much as I can about whatever it is that has to be learned about. When I'm working on my own projects, my own stories, I really try and research, but not research a massive amount, because I like to be very curious when I'm on the ground and be inspired. And so there's kind of and it really changes every project I work on. Maybe I'll research a little bit, or maybe I'll research a lot, but it's often like with the homeless as an example. I was, of course, seeing it every day, but also like seeing these blurbs in the newspaper, and had not read a massive amount about the homeless, but it was just there, and it really made me want to go outside and learn more about who these people were and what their story was. But yes, of course, if you're going to do like a proposal for a grant, or you're working on an assignment, it's good that you know as much as you can beforehand, and also even maybe ask fellow colleagues, journalists or other photographers and people who already have experience with that, so you can up your game.
Who do you go to for advice?
Usually my partner or my father. But I also actually, in the past few years, I've made like a handful of really, really close friends here in LA and around the US. And I have a good band of brothers who I can just call at any time and speak with them about anything. So that's crucial.
That's great. Well, we have another question from Craig Dinsdale, and he noticed, like many of us, you have a lot of knowledge on the people and the places that you photograph. He wants to know: do you take extensive notes while you're in the field? Because your retention of the scenes is remarkable.
Oh, thank you. Um, yeah, I keep a journal. I keep a diary, and I also, while in the field, I'll always have my iPhone notes. So I open up, the notes. I make whatever whatever I have to remember. I'll write down, and I'll even speak into the phone. So I have, on most of the projects I do, I have like set of audio notes that I've made. If I'm in a situation and I can't actually write, but I can speak, and I'll do that. So yeah, it's very important for me to not only photograph but write. So the work I showed from Libya, this work I made a photo book called Libyan Sugar that contained the images, but also contained a lot of writing, and a lot of the writing I pulled from the notes that I had made on the phone at the time, or notes I had made on my computer. And so, yeah, these things are very important, and really a lot of times they fill in the gaps in between all the photographs, which I feel can only really communicate so much.
And we've got Kim Bacchus wants to know, in terms of street photography, what is your process on street photography? How do you approach people? Do you ask for permission, or do you just seize every opportunity?
Wow. Yeah, every street photographer has their own way of approaching a scene, really. For me, in general, I try and make myself small and hidden. So I try not to really stand out on the street. A lot of it is kind of trial and error. But really, this is where your body language can have a huge impact on the kinds of images you're able to make. So, for example, if I'm standing on a sidewalk and there's a group like approaching me, walking at me, if I'm standing there looking right at them, facing them, holding the camera, versus maybe standing here on the side, maybe holding the camera like this and having a sort of less confrontational language. That's part of it. What's also part of it is the way that you speak, your words, but also how you say them. And again, I mentioned this at the very beginning of the presentation. A lot of times, like the way we feel, of course, has a huge effect on whoever we're communicating with. So if I'm feeling very anxious or nervous, that can often have an effect on whoever I'm going to photograph, and that comes through my body language and the way that I speak and everything. So when I'm more sort of when I'm calm, and when I stand in like a less aggressive way. I think aggressive is not the right word for it, but yeah, that all has an impact, and it's all just kind of trial and error. Just being out there and seeing what works for you.
And you mentioned the Sony cameras, and the mirrorless ones are especially tiny. They're not as large and aggressive. Do you think that helps?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Sonys have and also the fact that it's mirrorless as well. So I'll often shoot in silent mode because most of the time I'm photographing fairly closely, and so I like photographing where the you don't hear the shutter. Like even if I'm um, making a portrait, even if it's I'm on a set or something on an assignment and I'm making a portrait, I like having it on silent, so there's sort of less noise happening and there's less interference in between my relationship with whoever I'm photographing. But yeah, the size is a huge factor, and as well, and just the quality, the quality of the Sony chips I've always really loved. I mean, I've been using Sony exclusively for the past like 6 years. So
Wow, great. Again, we thank them for making today possible. We do have a question from Alex Strachan. What informed your decision to move over to black and white for these latest projects?
you know what? I often like find myself going back and forth between black and white and color. Um, so and even like the work I showed from the Levant was in black and white. But since then, I've actually processed some of these in color, and some of them I like more in color now than in black and white. So oftentimes I'll go back and I'll look at something again and think, like this is actually, the same with the work from the Skid Row. But at the time when I'm shooting and when I'm out there, it's, sometimes I guess I like see a story, the content of a story, and more as you know black and white or color. Um, uh, color can really get in the way. I find I think as I've gotten older, I'm more focused on content. So I'm much more focused on what's in the picture, what I'm photographing, over how great the light is or how colorful the scene is. I mean, of course, these things are they're important when I'm photographing something commercially or photographing for a client who wants something in color. But I'm much more focused on what is in the picture. And so generally I'm just shooting everything in color in raw format, or if it's on the phone, of course, I'm shooting everything in color, and then I look at it afterwards, and I think like, what is it? Is it color or black and white that is more complementary for whatever content this is, or the emotional quality of the photograph, if that makes sense.
Oh. And with the latest homelessness project, I think for some photographers, photojournalists, it's hard to photograph so close to home. Did you experience any difficulties in that project?
Yeah, for sure. The homeless project, I've actually been shooting that still, but mostly with film, medium format. But I sort of, yeah, it was very, very challenging. I mean, I sort of lost my train of thought on that actually, but yeah, the homelessness is it's like right down the street. So there's a guy now who lives like half mile away, and he lives out of his car on the side of the road, just right up here on the hill. And I go by his car every day, and this stuff is all over the place on the road, and it's clear that it's his circumstances are reflection of just everything that's happened in his life and in his interior world. And the process of like working on that project was, I really learned a lot about sort of just representation in general, um, while working on that project. And because I've always kind of gone out in the world with this very strong belief that everything should be photographed, and that we should try and whatever we're inspired by, and whatever we see is being important if we have good intentions, and if whoever we're photographing. So anyway, I mean, like, it's all to say, I guess, that I sort of, I think that it is important, photographing everything, but it's also important that when we present these things, that we present them in ways that are that really will do justice for whoever is in the photograph. And oftentimes that means, especially in very challenging situations, oftentimes that means really sharing as much information as we can, whether it's in a caption or, but just really like informing the public and, providing the reasons for why we're showing this imagery that is very challenging. So, we now live in a world where it's like we're all connected much more closely, and it's easy to kind of go anywhere and photograph something and load it onto your phone, onto your Instagram, whatever, and have it be out there. And generally that's okay, but it's also important that we respect the people we photograph, and that we share their stories, as much as we can, especially with vulnerable populations who could really benefit from our sharing of their story in a way that can really help them beyond just like showing what their circumstance is. Yeah.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
one last one I always like to end on is, we have a lot of photographers who are just starting out. But what advice do you have for them?
Just photograph as much as you can. I mean, but also photograph what you're truly inspired by and what you're passionate about, and really try and zero in on what that is. I mean, have fun, photograph everything, but yeah, try and sort of just really explore and explore all the the areas that you're curious about. Hey, Andrea.
That's great. Well, well, thank you so much, Michael, for the incredible body of work that you presented today, and for answering questions we could. I think we are about to introduce our next speaker. Garrett, are you there with us?
Yes, I am there. Can you let me in with a video as well? Oh.
All right, Garrett, how about you tell us who's up next month?
First, thank you very much, neighbor, for your powerful presentation. I saw a note from Bill Allard in the chat saying that this was the best presentation ever. Michael, this coming from Bill means a hell of a lot. And for you guys out there, Michael lives on the other side of the hill from here. That's why I call him neighbor. We can actually see each other's houses from across the valley. On March 1st, TPS presents Andrea Bruce. Based in North Carolina, Andrea is a documentary photographer whose work has focused on people living in the aftermath of war, concentrating on the social issues that are sometimes ignored and often ignited in war's wake. For the past 5 years, she has turned her attention to how people experience democracy in the United States through her project, Our Democracy. The project attempts to bridge America's divide and create a better understanding of the media. It also pushes people to look beyond politics examine the social conditions that underpin our society, and provide a visual record of the state of local democracy at this moment in our US history. I see, Andrea, you're in the audience. Can you give us a short preview of your upcoming presentation yourself, please?
Sure. First, Michael, thank you for your presentation. And I also have a 3-year-old who I call a three-nager. And it's pretty exciting, dramatic stuff to have a 3-year-old. Yeah, and thank you all. I'm excited to be here next month and talk about also how I got started, how I jumped into conflict photography without really meaning to, and where that took me in the understanding of democracy and worldwide, and then how that brought me back to the United States, and how to cover divided communities. Communities who feel no connection to the media anymore, and communities that wrestle with conspiracy theories and other things that have become really problematic to us as journalists, but also to democracy. So I'm looking forward to kind of sharing that with you, my journey and how I got there, and also the the thing that kind of pulls me into my work, which is emotion, and how unless we can really relate to each other, whether it's from a different country or a different language or a different belief system, then there's no way that we will care about other people. So, and I think that's one of photography's gifts, is being able to relate to each other on a human level. So that's what I'll be talking about.
That's great, Andrea, and we really look forward to having you. That's March 1st at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Those of you that signed up will be getting emails about that with the registration link. So we look forward to that. And we have one last major thing to go through. Michael, I have texted you the winner of our Sony ZV-1 camera. If you could read off that winner for us.
Okay. The winner is Linda Hosek.
Linda Hosek. So Linda, you are still in the audience, please type your email address into the chat so that I can have it, and I will work with you on getting you your Sony camera. Again, we thank Sony for their being just incredible sponsors, and we hope Linda enjoys the ZV-1. Gayer, do you have any parting words for us?
Yeah, just make sure to turn in on March 1st at 12 noon Eastern as usual for Andrea's presentation. Her presentation will be sponsored by our friends at Epson America, and one lucky winner will get one signed print from Andrea made with Epson technology, of course. Until then, thank you and auf Wiedersehen.
Yes, thank you everyone. Thank you, Michael, Andrea. Thank you, Molly, behind the scenes. And thank you, Jeff Roberts, for your relationship work with Sony. We look forward to seeing you on March 1st. I'm Alex Snyder for the Photo Society. Have a good day, everyone.